I have officially now given birth almost a month ago in a couple of days. And so I wanted to go ahead and share my birth story while I remember it and it's still a little bit fresh in my mind. For me to come back on, but then also for you to listen to because I know that a lot of people like listening to birth stories. So here we go. On the day that I gave birth, which I'm not going to share the exact date because I think that's a little odd to just share your child's birthday. Like, I just don't want to do that. But on the day that I was going to give birth, I woke up in the morning, like the early morning of that day, and I woke up to contractions. And this was the first time that I had felt any sort of contraction. I had not felt any sort of Braxton Hicks before this. Really nothing to indicate labor, except the fact that about 3 weeks prior, I had lost part of my mucus plug. And a couple of weeks after that, like a couple of days before I went into labor, I must have lost like the rest of my mucus plug. Like a couple days before, there was like a couple days where it was like, like a Sunday and a Monday and a Tuesday or something like that, where I lost more pieces of my mucus plug. And so I did know that labor was probably going to be coming pretty soon. I also was over 40 weeks pregnant, and I was getting close to 41 weeks pregnant, so I was pretty sure that it would hopefully be happening soon and did not want to get induced, but I did have an induction date set for the following Monday. So I gave birth on a Wednesday, and the following Monday was when I had my induction date. And what was so funny is I went into the hospital for a visit the day before, just for like the routine visits that they have you do, and that's when they scheduled my induction for the following Monday and the day right after I gave birth. So I didn't even need to have that visit, but it happened nonetheless. Anyways, next morning, it's a Wednesday that I gave birth on, and like I said, I woke up early in the morning around 2 a.m. and I started having like these small contractions, and they were coming, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes apart. Like I was maybe falling a little bit back to sleep in between. Like they weren't super tough at the moment, but they did start growing in intensity to the point where I was like, oh my goodness, are we going to have this baby like this morning? I was very surprised at how intense they started to come, but I just waited it out because that's what you want to do with early labor, is just wait it out. It can happen for days, so you don't really super know exactly when it's going to like continue progressing. Like people can be in early labor for days. A lot of people have prodromal labor. Like this can happen a lot. So I just grabbed a snack, ate that, went to the bathroom, and then went back to sleep. And so that was around 4 that I was able to fall back asleep, give or take. The last time I looked at the clock, it was 4. So, after that, I fell back asleep and woke up at 7:30 that morning, and I was like, okay, I'm not really feeling anything super intense now. The contractions, I hadn't felt them for while I was asleep, and they started back up again. And I had probably, 2 or 3, I guess, in that half hour before my husband was about to go to work, which I guess is a lot, but they were very inconsistent, and they weren't very harsh at this point. And so I'm like, okay, well, you go to work. If something, this progresses, then I'll just call you, whatever. You come home, we go to the hospital, like whatever. Like the baby's we're 10 minutes from the hospital. His work is 30 minutes away. This isn't, going to come that fast that he would need to rush home or that he needed to stay home or anything. And so he went into work because like I said, I didn't know it could last days like this, where it's just kind of on and off, on and off. And I started my virtual work that I did, and I just lived my life as normal. And the contractions did continue to come. I just kind of ignored them, tried to focus on doing my work, not getting too excited, eating some snacks and stuff, eating lunch, so that way my body's fueled for labor, and that way too, like, you know, I'm not too hyper analyzed about it. And I would say about 11 a.m. of that Wednesday, I started going into more consistent labor. And I would say they were probably about 5 or so minutes apart, the contractions. And like I said, we're 10 minutes from the hospital. And some of them were like 5 minutes apart, some of them were 10. But the contractions had started to get more and more intense. And so I finally was like, okay, I can't keep working while I'm doing this. Like, it just wasn't working. So at about 1, I think I stopped working and kind of emailed and just was like, hey, I'm pretty sure I'm in early labor, but, you know, not positive. So can you take this? And then kind of coordinated that. And I forgot about notifying my supervisor, I think, till a lot later that night, or maybe even the next day, till after the baby was born, that I was in labor. So I had kind of let her know, like, hey, pretty sure I'm in labor, but, you know, just wait for confirmation, because I was just wanting to work right up till I was in labor, just to make as much as possible before I went into labor. And so like I said, like, I was pretty sure I was, but I'm like, hey, I might be able to squeeze a couple extra days out of this. Who knows? Anyway, at about 1 p.m., I was like, okay, I'm done with work. I had finished most of my stuff and everything. And like I said, the intensity had started to definitely build. The contractions came a bit closer together now. And so I had already eaten lunch and everything. And from 1 until my husband was going to come home, I was just like, okay, well, now I just need to be super focused on, like, breathing through them and trying to find other ways to distract my mind, because work was just, like, too intensive of a way of, like, okay, I need to kind of focus here. And that was just, like, too much to focus on. You know, it's not super stressful, but it kind of adds a little bit of stress, and then also the pain of labor, which is very stressful. But anyway, so for a bit, I just read a novel that I had gotten from the library, and I also, like, took a bath to try to, like, calm the contractions down, because I've heard that if you get in the water, it'll kind of help the contractions not feel quite as strong, because at this point they were getting, like, pretty strong, but they were still a ways apart. And so I was, like, having to breathe through them pretty consistently. I could still talk or whatever, but they were getting very, like, to the point where I'm like, this hurts, like, quite a bit. I feel like we're getting closer to going to the hospital, but not yet. And at about 3:30, at that point, I was, like, timing my contractions, and I'm like, oh my goodness, these contractions are, like, 1 to 2 minutes apart. So technically, by that standard, the baby could come any minute. But they were only 30 seconds long. So it wasn't like 3 minutes apart, the contractions 1 minute long, and, you know, you're there for 1 minute. I think they were just, like, 1 to 2 minutes apart, and then I would have a super strong contraction for like 30 seconds, but they weren't lasting like a minute. So I'm like, okay, well, you know, I didn't want to go to the hospital in early labor and then just have them send me home. And I've heard of people who were like, my contractions were so strong and I went to the hospital and I was only like 2 centimeters. So I didn't want that to happen. And so I was just like, okay, well, whatever. I'll just text Drew and be like, hey, pretty sure you need to come home a little bit early. And so I did. My husband, I texted him and was like, okay, please come home early because I am in a pain. And at this point, it was enough pain that I was like, okay, maybe I'll consider doing the epidural. I initially didn't want to do birth without an epidural, but I was sitting there and I'm like, okay, if this is this painful, these contractions, wherever I'm at right now, I'm still thinking I'm in early labor, and so I'm still a bit worried that it's just going to get worse and worse. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll be open to this epidural, because if this is this bad, like, imagine how much worse it is when the baby's coming out and the ring of fire and everything like that. Like, I kind of wanted that epidural to, you know, make the canal not as painful. Well, interesting story, but we will get to that point later. Anyways, so at this point, my husband came home, and by the time he was home, I had, like, everything packed up, stuff in the bag. Like, I'm like, okay, let's go, because I was in pain. I was like, okay, if I'm getting the epidural, I know that I have to get it before I'm 8 centimeters. At this point, like, my contractions were coming like 1 to 2 minutes apart, and they were like 30 seconds long, super intense, and I was ready. And so I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna block the pain anyways by having the epidural, then I might as well get it now. Because I know that once you get there, there's some time before you are able to get it, and I knew that that would be the case, and so that's kind of why I was like, okay, let's get a move on here, because I didn't want to have I'm like, if this is this painful, I don't want to be there in an hour and have the baby, and it be that painful. Like, imagine having to suffer through that. So we went to the hospital around 4. By the time we got there and processed and everything, it was probably, 4:30, 5 o'clock. And then they, like, I don't know, I had to pee in a cup, and we got there, and, the people are talking to me and stuff. And so I think my contractions slowed down a little bit for that part. I definitely still felt them. They were still painful, but I had been breathing through them this entire time and just trying to, focus my mind not on the pain. And so the nurse was checking us in, and then she checked my dilation, which, by the way, is very painful as well. I do not like that it was just horrible. So I'm like, if I don't like this, like, I'm not gonna want a baby coming out, okay? And to feel that pain, so I was at 6 centimeters, so I was thrilled. I'm like, okay, great, I'm at 6 centimeters, I can do this. Like, I got to where I wanted to get to, well into active labor, and to be ready for the epidural. So I'm like, okay, great, like, this is fine. She put my IV in. Drew had been with me, so he'd kind of been calming me down through the contractions. But like I said, these ones were very, very painful, don't get me wrong, but I could kind of focus my mind away from them. So the nurses did an ultrasound to make sure the baby's head was down on me, or I don't know, sonogram, whatever you want to call it. And they couldn't tell. They're like, I don't know where the baby's head is. I don't see it. And so they had to wait for the doctor. The doctor came in a bit later. And so then he checked for where the head was. And he's like, okay, yeah, it's just lower than what you thought. And they're like, oh my goodness, that baby is low. And they're like, wow, we might have a baby fairly soon. And I'm like, okay, great. That's awesome. Like, get this baby out of me. I'm ready. Whatever. And so my water was also very low, and so it was causing a lot of pressure. It really, I'm surprised it didn't burst, but it was like so low that the nurses said that they were surprised it didn't burst anyways too. But was wheeled to the hospital room, had IV fluids. Like, while I was having the IV fluids through me for an hour from like 5:15 to 6:15, I was just like walking around. The nurse helped me work through some of the contractions, and she like was asking us questions about like our family size and stuff, and we told her we wanted a bunch of kids. And after I got the epidural, after about an hour, they had to leave the room, and the anesthesiologist was putting it in and everything. And she's like, you know what, next time I think you could totally do this naturally. You were, I was coaching you through the breathing, and you were absolutely doing it. And if that's what you want, like, we can totally do that next time. And I'm like, okay, awesome. Like, I'm glad she thinks that I can do this. But like I said, I was still very scared for the pain that would come later. And I'm like, okay, this is right. Like, this is painful. This is very painful, but I can work my way through this. But, you know, it's just going to get worse. So they put the epidural in me. It actually ended up hitting my sciatic nerve, which already had pain during pregnancy. So that was very, very painful for that moment. But then it kind of moved so I could kind of adjust, and then it wasn't like pressing on my sciatic nerve as much. So it wasn't as bad, but I could kind of feel that throughout the rest of labor as well. And then obviously I was put on my back and my legs went numb, which was really, really weird. So I was no longer able to kind of walk around and like do things. Obviously, I mean, you know, if you get an epidural, but you can't walk around. But it was very weird. Like, it was just weird to be put on my back, and I felt very uncomfortable the whole time. I guess it's better than painful for some people, but it was very much like I was constantly squirming the whole time. And then anyways, my husband came back in, and at that point, I'm guessing because I was placed on my back, like, I don't know how that adjusted everything inside, but I started to have back contractions. And my contractions were like every 1 to 2 minutes still, and so I was having these intensely painful back contractions. And when I say intense, like, those were the most painful contractions that I had, were the back contractions. My husband was like, he'll even say, he was like, yeah, I think she had a much worse time once the back contractions came, because I could feel them. I'm like, I can feel this. And I remember being like, this is so painful, and I couldn't feel as much that I could breathe through them. I'm sure that in the front they would have like continued in that pain intensity that they did in the back. I just probably hadn't gotten there yet, and I hadn't gotten the epidural already, but it was the back contractions were so painful. And so I was having them kind of the whole time that I had the epidural until I began pushing, to the best of my knowledge and recollection. So there was like several hours in there that I was having very painful back contractions. They were happening very frequently, and even like they tried to put me on my side and rotate me so that way I kind of wasn't as having such a painful experience with the back contractions, but it still hurt. It still was there. So anyway, at about 7:30, the doctor came in and broke my water. Maybe it was 8. I'm not completely sure. There was a clock in front of me, so I did kind of try to keep timestamps in my head. But anyways, he came, he broke my water, and that was honestly a huge relief. I was so scared to have him do it, because until after I got my epidural, because I'm like, I'm going to be able to feel that. I don't want to feel that. So, the bag of water had put a ton of pressure on whatever, I don't know, the canal or whatever that area is, my cervix. Like, it was putting a huge amount of pressure on it. Like, I can't even explain. It was painful how much pressure there was on it. And so once he broke it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so much more relief. I was so glad that he broke it. But anyways, I wish I had been fine with that earlier. So anyways, around that time, he broke my water, and then the doctor left, and the nurses were just in there, and I just continued in labor while after he broke my water for a bit, and like I said, was still having those back contractions. But a note I will make is when they were checking my cervix, and when he broke my waters, and when that catheter was put in, I felt all of that just the same in that area. Must have not gotten a single bit of numbing, because I felt everything like exactly the same as before I ever got any pain meds, and they checked my cervix. It felt exactly the same as that. So I'm guessing that that part of my body did not get any of the epidural. It was my legs and it was my belly. And they had told me after I got the epidural, oh, you know, for some people, like, it's good at, you know, focusing on the place where the contractions are, but you still may feel everything in your vaginal canal. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that was kind of the pain that I'm trying to avoid, because I'm sitting here dealing with these contractions just fine. But I didn't not say that. I thought that in my head. But I mean, I don't know, because I haven't had a birth besides one with an epidural. But I felt, I like, when they checked my cervix up to the point I gave birth, like, I felt everything exactly the same as before I ever had any pain meds. So that's kind of why I think that's it didn't do what I wanted it to do, I think, in the end. And so anyways, after that point, I did what by 9:30 they were like, okay, you're ready to push, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready. I could kind of feel that. I'm like, yeah, am I ready to push yet? Like, I feel like I'm ready to push. And they're like, yes, you are. And then I pushed for about an hour before he came out, and he was born, the little baby. He was so cute. And honestly, after he was born, like, I didn't feel anything else, that, like, any residual pain from anything. I literally felt no pain. They're like, what's your pain? I'm like, it's zero. It's literally zero. Now, I did feel when the doctor, like, went back in there to give me a lidocaine shot and to stitch me up, like, I could feel all of that. It didn't it didn't really hurt, but I could feel that, but I didn't feel any sort of, like, pain from the tear or anything. I did tear 2nd degree. But the whole time I was giving birth to the baby, I could feel everything. At first, it was just, like, pressure, and it wasn't, and when I say pressure, like, usually when I say pressure, I mean painful pressure, because for me, most pressure is pain. But for part of the pushing, like, I did not, it was not painful. It was just, like, I would get to the point where there was some pain, and then the baby's head would kind of go back in a little bit, and so it really was not painful. So that's why I'm wondering, like, maybe the upper part had gotten some of the epidural, because I really did not feel pain there. I just felt pressure. But whenever they had put the catheter in me and stuck their fingers in me and everything else, I could feel the pain. And so I don't know if it helped or not, helped take some of the edge away. I have no idea. But anyway, so that felt like pressure for the first bit of pushing, and then towards the end, it was horrifying. It was horrible. Like, I know, I'm sitting here talking, I don't have the words. It was the most painful thing in the world, and I want a million babies. Like, I love babies. I really do. Even though I'm sleep deprived and the baby cries a lot, like, I love babies and children in general. And I'm like, I still want a lot of these, but how am I going to do this any more times? Now I'm like, okay, you know, I can do that more times. But in the moment, I'm like, how am I going to do this again? I never said I didn't want to do it again. Like, some people are like, I never want to do this again, apparently at their birth. I never said that. Because I don't... you can't say that about such a short period of pain. It's such a short period of pain. Like, the child is so much more worth the short period of pain. And it was the most painful thing. It felt like my entire body was on fire. It really is a ring of fire. That's what it feels like. I would even say I would rather get burnt than feel that sometimes. Maybe like on my finger or something, get burnt on my finger. But anyway, that was very, 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 very painful. And so I felt all of that, and the pushing, like, towards the end of pushing and everything. And so finally the baby was out, was placed on my chest and everything. And like I said, after that, I felt no pain. And he latched just fine after a little while. Like, I just remember people with towels, and then he was on me and he was crying, and then he latched, and after a bit, I guess. And I think that was it. That was all I remember. I gave birth at 10:30 p.m. that night. So the total amount of time that I was like literally in labor was 2 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. And I would say like consistent labor was like 11ish a.m. to 10:30 p.m. So it really wasn't, it was pretty fast. Like, it was, I guess it's 11 and a half hours. Like, that's pretty fast for first time mom. So I was pretty thrilled with my time schedule and everything. I'm like, okay, this is doable. That's doable. And the moment you're just kind of focused on doing it. And honestly, the nurses and the doctor were all like, we thought this baby was gonna come a lot sooner. Like, we're surprised it hasn't come already. Maybe I wasn't pushing hard enough. Probably. I don't know. But anyways, I only did have an hour of pushing. I don't know if that's an only. Some of the nurses were like, wow, that's really great. Like, most have more. And then, you know, I don't know. Other people were like, no, an hour is super long. Anyway, I don't know. But it was overall a pretty good experience. Obviously, it was a painful experience. So it's not something I particularly look forward to doing again. But I do think, like that nurse said to me, she's like, next time if you come in and you want to do natural birth, she's like, I think you can do it. If I felt the total amount of pain from that, like, if it's gonna be where you feel the pain in the canal, like, I don't mind the contractions as much and working through them. And like I said, those back contractions really, really hurt. So I feel like if I could deal with all of that, potentially I could deal with a natural birth in the future, but I don't know. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's my first baby boy's birth story. And if you listen to this and came to the end, congratulations. Thank you for listening. He's now almost a month old, which is crazy. Oh, my baby's growing up. It's so crazy. Anyway, it goes by so fast because you feel like the whole time you're just sleeping or feeding, and that's it. And that's just your life. It's just sleeping and feeding. I'm just joking. Later on, there's a lot more. I feel like I have a lot more time now than I did in those early couple weeks. I mean, I'm only 4 weeks out, but I feel like I have more time and have much more of a routine set down with the baby. And I really, really love it and being his mom. So thank you guys for tuning in. Go ahead and like, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.